Have 6 o'clock, so I think we'll go ahead and get started. First, I want to say welcome to the meeting tonight. Tonight's meeting is being hosted by MDOT and the Central Mississippi Planning and Development District, who serves as the Jackson MPO. My name is Sammy Hokel, the statewide planning manager with MDOT, and I want to thank you for taking time out of your busy schedule to be a part of the long-range transportation planning process in Mississippi. I hope that you find this meeting informative as we present our work on the Multi-Plan 2045, and that's just an acronym for Mississippi's Unified Long-Range Transportation Infrastructure Plan with a horizon year of 2045. You might be asking, what is Multi-Plan? Multi-Plan 2045 is a federal requirement that provides a strategic direction or a blueprint that addresses our transportation needs over a 25-year horizon, and it's updated every 5 years. It's also a coordinated effort to develop MDOT's statewide long-range transportation plan and the plans for the Jackson Metropolitan Planning Organization, the Hattiesburg, Petal, Forest, Lamar Metropolitan Planning Organization, and the Mississippi Gulf Coast Metropolitan Planning Organization. It includes 4 separate plans that are developed simultaneously so that we can maintain consistency. We began this effort in late 2018, teaming with each of our MPOs, along with Cambridge Systematics, Neil Schaefer, Beyond Communication, Robinson Studio, and SOL Engineering. We held public meetings in 2019. We gained a lot of valuable feedback, and now we want to share our progress. Tonight, we will provide an overview of MDOT's statewide draft long-range plan, information about MDOT's rail planning initiatives, and the Jackson Metropolitan Transportation Plan. Other virtual meetings will take place for the Hattiesburg area on October the 27th and the Gulf Coast area on October the 29th at 6 p.m. Traditionally, we do hold these meetings in person to present our draft long-range transportation plans. However, due to safety concerns related to COVID-19, we are offering these virtual meetings to present the draft plans to you and encourage you to provide feedback to us. So MDOT and the Central Mississippi Planning and Development District, we want to hear from you concerning our draft plans. Other ways to be involved will be discussed later during this meeting. Before we move on, I'd like to introduce our multi-plan team members that are attending the virtual meeting tonight. From MDOT, we have Evan Wright, he's a state planning engineer, Trung Trinh, transportation planner, Lindsay Killebrew, transportation planner. From CMPDD, from the Jackson MPO, we have Mike Monk, chief executive officer, Leslie Callender, senior transportation planner, Chuck Carr, Director of Planning and Management, and Scott Burge, Senior Transportation Analyst. And our federal highway partners, we have Shundrika Given and Randy Jansen with us tonight. Those that are presenting tonight, Paula Dow, Principal with Cambridge Systematics, who has taken the lead on the statewide plan. She'll give an overview of the proposed statewide long-range transportation plan. Lisa Destro, a senior associate with Cambridge Systematics, she has taken the lead on our rail planning efforts, and she'll give an update of our rail plan. Taylor Mercantile was a senior planner with Neil Schaefer. He's going to provide the overview of the proposed Metropolitan Transportation Plan for the Jackson MPO. Tonight, we also have several individuals that are available to answer any of your questions. We have Paula Dow. She'll be addressing verbal questions concerning the statewide plan. We also have Lisa Destro. She's going to answer questions about the state rail plan development. Leslie Callender with CMPDD. She's going to address questions about the Jackson Metropolitan Transportation Plan verbally and within the chat box. And on the statewide side, Hannah Santiago, she's monitoring the chat box for us, and she will type responses to any of your statewide questions that can easily be addressed there. But we do have a team on the phone. If you have any questions, we'll do our best to get those answered. So now I want to introduce Donna Lum. She's going to be tonight's meeting moderator because we want this. She's going to lay out some ground rules, and she's going to give us some direction on how this meeting is going to proceed. And we do want this meeting to be as effective and as efficient as possible. So Donna, I'm going to turn it over to you.
Oh, thank you, Sammy. So Sammy, as he said, I'm Donna Lum, and tonight let's see, let me share my computer. I don't need to do that yet. Sorry about that. Paula, will you take control back? Oh, no. I'm so sorry.
Y'all just bear with us just a moment. This is the first virtual public meeting we've had, and so we want to make sure that again, we want this meeting efficient and effective.
I'm sorry, guys. Of course, I'll be the first one to do that, but I wanted to tell you that tonight, this is a live presentation. It is being recorded, so everybody should be muted. And that's just to drown out the background noise there. The meeting that you see tonight will be posted on the Multiplan website for your review. If you have to step away, you can come back at a later date. And we expect this meeting to take about 1 hour. So you see the agenda there for you, for those that are on your computer. I'd like to just quickly step through it for those who are calling in by phone. So tonight's agenda, we have the MDOT Draft Statewide Long Range Transportation Plan overview, and then we'll have a question and answer period. We have the MDOT Rails information overview, followed by a question and answer period. Then we have the Draft Metropolitan Transportation Plan overview, followed by another question and answer period. So at the end of the presentation, if you still have questions that you might have thought of that you didn't get a chance to ask during the question and answer periods that are built into the presentation, you can still ask those at the end of the presentation. Each of the presentation overviews should take about 15 minutes. Okay, next slide. So we want to hear your questions about the presentation, the information that we're presenting tonight. So if you're calling in or participating in this virtual public meeting from a computer, you can type your questions in the chat box that's located on your screen. As Sammy indicated, somebody will be monitoring that chat box and they will be able to answer you throughout the meeting. If you feel like your question just won't fit in the chat box, you can always unmute yourself and ask any questions during the question and answer period. For those who are participating by phone, you can unmute yourself by hitting *6 during the question and answer period, and then you can just jump in at any time and ask your question. But we do value your input and your time, so to ensure that a productive meeting is achieved by all, disruptive or inappropriate comments or questions will be deleted, and then that person, the disruptive individual, will be blocked from the meeting. Okay, so next slide. Tonight's presentation is, of course, there we go. If you should need assistance after tonight's meeting, you can always call the MDOT Planning Division. They're available at 601-359-7685. That's MDOT Planning Division, 601-359-7685. And you can call that number anytime after this meeting during normal operating hours. If you would like to speak with someone at the Central Mississippi Planning and Development District, you can do so by calling 601-981-1511. That's 601-981-1511. So now I think I'll try to take control, Paula, if I could. And I'd like to demonstrate to everybody the Multiplan website. So you should be able to see my screen now if I do this right this time. And let's see, I'm not seeing that. Oh, me. Okay. And I don't see how to not do it without getting myself out. So I'm sorry, I will not demonstrate that at this time. Let's go back to the meeting if that's all right. So tonight's the agenda is back in front of you again. We'll go back to his presentation, and I will turn it over to Paula at this time. So Paula, she's a principal with Cambridge Systematics. If you would take it away.
Okay, great. Thank you and welcome everyone, and thanks again for joining us this evening. And we look forward to hopefully giving you a quick overview and then answering any questions that you might have. So we will start out with a little more detail in terms of the multi-plan 2045. So I will be covering the statewide transportation plan, which covers all of the modes and throughout the entire state. We'll discuss the multi-plan goals and then the process that we used. We will then spend the bulk of our time talking about the draft plan and then open it up for questions and answers from the audience. So what is Multi-Plan 2045? Well, we want to make sure that you understand that the 2045 goals, they do align with all of the national and the federal goals as well. And so this is a quick diagram that shows that relationship. On the outer realm of that, you will see the national transportation goals that comes from the Federal Transportation Act. And it's the current transportation bill is the FAST Act. And then you can see within the inner circle there, the Multi-Plan 2045 goals, which are maintenance and preservation to maintain and preserve the system that you have today, to provide access and mobility to all citizens and residents and tourists, as well as freight mobility, to facilitate economic development through the movement of both people and freight, to ensure that you have environmental stewardship, and to make sure that there's awareness, education, and cooperative process. And Multi-Plan is a great example of this in terms of MDOT cooperating with the regional planning agencies and then really soliciting public and stakeholder input. And then to ensure that there's sustainable funding and finance to meet the transportation needs and to focus on safety and the move toward that zero fatality goal. In developing Multi-Plan, we used a performance-based planning process. And so what that means is that we started with establishing the goals and objectives. And so that helps to identify the potential transportation solutions that meet your regional and your statewide need, knowing that there's not going to be a one-size-fits-all across the entire state. We then select the performance measures. And some of these you will notice as we start to talk about the plan, we'll talk about both federal performance measures and targets, and then MDOT established targets. And so this helps us to monitor the progress toward achieving those goals and objectives. With the targets, those are the quantifiable metrics marking achievement of all or a portion of the goal. And so as we have those goals and objectives, and then we'll select our performance measures, and then we identify the target. What's the target? And once we reach that target, we are accomplishing that goal and objective. And then once we understand that, we have to say, well, what's it going to take to meet those targets? And that's when we develop our investment strategies. And these are to make investments based upon the demonstrated performance of the long-range transportation goals and objectives. And so you'll see this as we talk about our planning for performance tool and the trade-off analysis. And then at the end, we want to make sure that we measure how well have we achieved that performance after the adoption of Multi-Plan, the measures, and we want to measure and record the result of implementing that plan. So this was a very data-driven and stakeholder-informed process, and wanted to walk you through quickly the needs assessment process. And once again, we did state that this was multimodal, so you'll see that we developed modal profiles for all of the different modes that you have there. And that was really about determining those existing conditions, which were the inventory of the system, and then we also looked at the demand for that system, and then the conditions and the performance. And so we could look and evaluate any existing or current deficiencies or needs. We then also looked at the future conditions, and this was accomplished by forecasting the future demand. And again, this is for both people movement as well as freight movement. And then we looked at the plan, we mapped that against the planned transportation investments, and then we looked to see where there's still gaps in terms of meeting those targets. And so that would help us identify those future needs. So once we put all of this data and analysis together, combined it with embedded it with the stakeholder input, we then were able to establish our existing and our future needs and deficiencies that we had. And so with that, we kind of talk about our draft plan that we'd have here. And so we did use a process we call planning for performance, and we actually developed a tool that's going to be delivered to MDOT so that they can continue the implementation of the Multi-Plan 2045. And so what it actually does is that by visualizing the consequences of our decisions in terms of if we invest so much here, this is the performance we can expect. If we don't invest here, then that's the performance we're going to expect. So it allowed you to see that trade-off between your spending and the performance. And then it also allowed you to track your budget, because we had to generate revenue forecasts to see how much can we realistically expect MDOT to have to spend on these investment strategies. And then sometimes you can't spend every single dollar any way you want to. Some of those, depending upon the source of the funds, have to be spent on certain programs. For example, money coming in through the Federal Transit Administration has to be spent on public transit. And so we call that the color of money. So we wanted to make sure that that was reflected in there as well. And then what this does was it allows us to develop and evaluate different investment scenarios so that we can generate those funding scenarios in response to the overall goals and objectives of Multi-Plan. And so just a quick look in terms of understanding where does the money come from that MDOT has, and then how does the money get spent. And this is taken from the MDOT annual plan, and it does represent fiscal year 2019. So you'll see over on the right-hand side, the MDOT revenue sources. And the big takeaway from this is to really look at your federal funds, which accounts for about $610 million, and that's 55% of MDOT's total annual budget. The other 45% comes from state sources. The biggest portion of that is going to be the state motor fuel tax, coming in at about $306 million. And that represents 27% of the total budget that you have. So by combining your federal funds, which in large part is your federal motor fuels tax, with your state fuel tax, you'll see that you're already accounting for about 82% of your total budget from those sources. And then there's a lot of other smaller categories, including things like truck and bus taxes and fees. You'll also have contractors tax. You'll have your tag fees, your commercial vehicle fees, and then you also have some interest, and then a bunch of other smaller things, including the recently passed lottery tax revenues coming in for other receipts. In total, all of those other smaller would combine for 5%. When you look at the expenditure side of the equation and how MDOT spends its money, 85% or $928 million is spent on your state maintained road and bridge system. This includes your construction program as well as your routine maintenance and operations of that system. And so the remaining 15% of that, 9% is actually transferred for local road and bridge system. So if you look at the 85 and the 9, that's 94% of their total budget that is spent on either state or local road and bridge systems. And then you have another 4% that's going to be transferred for other purposes, and that's going to be things for like your aviation, your ports, your rail, as well as your transit. And then there's business support, which accounts for 2%. So overall, the fact that 92% of all the funds are actually spent on road and bridge makes MDOT amongst one of the more efficient state DOTs throughout the nation. So next comes our investment scenarios. And again, the time period that we're looking at for the multi-plan 2045 is from 2020 to 2045. So for this, we developed three different funding and our investment scenarios. So the expected budget, that is based upon if we take the revenue and we look at the trend of the revenue and we assume that going forward, we are using the same revenue sources and the same tax and fee rates going forward, what budget can MDOT expect to have? We also have the enhanced budget, and this is the expected budget, except for we assume that the lottery funds, which you just started, those are set to sunset in 2028. So the bill that was funded establishing those that transfer lottery funds over into to MDOT, that's set to expire in 2028. So our enhanced budget is our expected budget, but we assume that those lottery funds are extended until 2045 as opposed to sunsetting in 2028. And that's projected to be about 80 million per year. And so then the adequate budget is the budget if MDOT were to meet all federal and MDOT targets, this is the budget that would be required. And so in terms of the expected budget, what we have there is an estimated $590 million. So once again, we are really, in this investment scenario, we are focused on the construction program so that a lot of that, that other 400 million that you see out of that annual budget, those are for your transfers to your local. It also is for some more of your routine maintenance activities that happen. And so we are focused on the capital program budget here. So the expected budget from 2020 to 2045 is an average of 590 million that's stated in 2018 dollars. The enhanced budget is 613 million in 2018 dollars. And then for the adequate budget, if we were to actually have the budget necessary to meet all the federal and MDOT targets, would be over $1 billion, about $1,034 million. And so we're going to break down what kind of performance we get under these three investment scenarios. So for scenario one, that's your total expected budget. So that's using that average of 590 million. Of that, you would project to spend 153 million per year on your interstate pavement. That allows us to meet the federal target, which is a requirement that you have no more than 5% of your interstate payment rated as poor condition. And so if you were to spend 153 million per year, you could actually have 3% poor. So that means you would meet that target. The other part of the federal target for interstate payment is that you need 55% or better in good. Well, the 153 million only lets us meet that poor target of getting less than 5%. We're only going to get about 40% of the payment in good, but that's making progress. As of right now, MDOT is only required to meet the poor target. However, under any new federal transportation bill, it could be that they would then have to meet that good target as well, or risk or put some of their federal funding at risk. So that is something they will keep an eye on, and we may need to come back and amend that and revisit that so that we're spending enough to make sure that we're meeting both of those. However, that means that the money's going to have to come from one of these other buckets that you see up here. Continuing on with your NHS, your National Highway System non-interstate payment. Once again, this one is under a federal target where you can have no more than 10% in poor, and you want at least 25% in good. Well, if MDOT can spend 144 million, they can meet their poor and have 10% in poor, but they're going to also have 68%. They're going to exceed that part on the good. So for spending 144 million, they can meet both of their federal targets there. On the non-NHS state-owned 4-lane program, MDOT has established their own target of having 75% or better in good condition, and then no more than 25% in your poor condition. So spending $9 million is going to allow MDOT to meet that target or get really close to that target for your non-NHS state-owned 4-lane. And you may be asking, why so little for that program when you're spending so much more on the other? Well, that's also the program where there's the least amount of mileage. So there's only about 1,500 miles within that category. So that is one of the reasons that that requires a little less investment to meet those targets. Now, where you really start to get into have some performance concerns are in your non-NHS state-owned 2-lane pavement. And these are some of the older roads within the state as well. So based upon the expected budget, MDOT's only going to have about $37 million per year to spend on these 2-lane pavement program. And with that, they're only going to get about 1% of the total pavement in good condition and about 99% of the pavement in poor condition. This is also, there's over 15,000 miles of these 2-lane roads. And so, and those are just the state maintained 2-lane roads. And so as you can see, it's a vast system. It's part of the older system, and it's going to cost a lot to really keep that one in a state of good repair. And then we can move on to our bridge, and for the National Highway System state-owned bridge, once again, there are federal targets that require that you have at least 95% of those bridges in good and fair condition and no more than 4% in poor. So if MDOT can spend $90 million per year, they can meet both of those federal targets. And then on the non-NHS state-owned bridges, once again, MDOT has set targets there of having 98% in good condition and 2% in poor. And so if you're spending that, you're going to be able to get real close to meeting those targets at all. So bridges have been a big focus of investment. And again, these are focused on state, so it doesn't include all of your local and your county bridges. But you can tell that they've made a lot of progress in terms of the state-owned bridges. And so by their expected budget will allow them to continue to meet those targets. Down at the bottom of the screen, you will see some of the other categories here. And we have capacity spending here, but what this really is, because there's going to be very little money on average to expand capacity. And so all you're really going to be able to do, MDOT, is to actually get your preliminary engineering and maybe acquire your right-of-way and get projects ready in the event that there would be additional money become available, because you're only going to have $17 million on average per year to spend on getting capacity projects ready. And given the cost of building new roads and bridges, that just isn't going to actually allow you to build projects, but it can get some ready and in the pipeline. And then you'll see that they want to maintain their existing spending levels in these other categories. $30 million per year on safety projects, $30 million per year on operations, $1 million per year on intelligent transportation systems, or ITS, and this is technology that can help improve the operations of the system. $25 million on transit, and again, this is coming through the FTA, so this is money that has to be spent on transit, and so they look for that to continue. And then for aviation, $3 million from your multimodal fund to be spent there. Rails and ports, you get $5 million from your multimodal fund to be spent there. And then on bike and ped, you want to maintain about $1 million per year so that you can maintain existing levels. So for scenario 2, again, the same sort of graphic here. It's the enhanced budget with the lottery revenue continued. Everything on this slide remains the same as the previous slide, with the exception that additional lottery revenue that's currently set to sunset in 2028 goes through 2045. All of that money is put into your 2-lane pavement program. And so that bumps you up from that $37 million on average per year to a $60 million on average per year in 2018 dollars. And that allows you to get 7% of your 15,000 plus miles in good condition and leaving only 93% then in your poor condition. So still a long way to go in terms of meeting your target there. And then, as I said, everything else there stays the same as the scenario 1. Going in now to the scenario 3, which is the adequate budget here. If you really wanted to meet both your federal targets on interstate payment, meaning that you would have 55% in good and then less than 5% in poor condition, MDOT needs to spend about $210 million per year compared to their expected budget of projection of 153 is what they're going to have to spend. On the NHS non-interstate, that 144 that they're going to spend under their expected budget is enough to help them to meet and exceed their federal targets here. The same is true for the 4-lane program. The other big thing really comes in on your 2-lane program. If MDOT were to meet their 75% of that system in good and 25% of the pavement in that system in poor, they would need to spend on average $360 million per year. The other category here that where there's a funding shortfall is for capacity. Remember, under the expected budget and enhanced, we only have $17 million per year. In order to really meet their capacity and be able to build out projects to maintain their level of service targets, they would need to spend on average $80 million per year on capacity projects. And then for the remaining categories, they would want to continue to maintain, at a minimum, maintain their current level. So what does this mean? Well, when you compare the biggest gap there outside of capacity, the gap is going to come from your pavement. So the adequate annual budget to meet your targets relative to your expected budget means that there's going to be that funding gap of $380 million per year. Your expected budget, you're going to have $343 million per year to spend. Your adequate budget to actually meet all of your targets would be $723 million. So that means that your gap for your pavement is $380 million per year. So with that, I'm going to pause and see if we have any questions, and I'm going to try to provide the answers if you do on the statewide plan, draft plan. And if you are speaking, don't forget to unmute, either by clicking unmute on the computer screen, or if you're on the phone only, you may want to try *6. And please don't forget, we do have the chat box available if you want to type in questions. I know that's a lot of numbers and everything that we've given you, and so, and then I do see a question here in the chat box about confirming. You can go to the website. We encourage you to go there. All of the information plus additional detail is provided in the draft plan document, and you can submit official comments there, and you can also submit questions either via email or by calling MDOT's planning department as well. All right, if there are no questions on the statewide plan, again, there's some more information. So you can see the website where you can go and download the plan document and submit a formal comment. You can also email Sammy, or you can call MDOT at 601-359-7685 or at 601-249-5282 to request additional information or to ask questions. All right. Well, I'm going to turn it over now to Lisa Destro, a senior associate at Cambridge Systematics. She is managing the update of the state rail plan, and while it's still under development, we did want to provide you with an update. So, Lisa.
All right, thank you, Paula. Can you hear me okay? Okay, good. All right, 1 second. Here we are. All right, before we talk about the state rail plan development, I wanted to briefly talk about why rail transportation matters and hence why planning for the rail transportation system in the state is important. Rail availability has a significant impact on economic development. MDA, which is the Mississippi Development Authority, noted that 3 of the largest economic development projects in Mississippi, which included Nissan, Toyota, and Yokohama, all included the addition of rail line spurs to provide direct rail access. Rail is also a big link in the national supply chain. Railroads carried 1/3 of all U.S. ton miles in 2017, and this is inclusive of all modes, so including truck, air, water, pipeline, and rail. Rail also provides some of the nation's best paid jobs, with an average compensation of nearly $120,000 a year. It helps with congestion mitigation and highway wear and tear, or avoids highway wear and tear. With a single train hauling several hundred truckloads worth of freight, the railroads ease the burden on the highways. Amtrak, which provides intercity rail service in the state, and the freight railroads enhance mobility options for Mississippians and shippers. Safety. When auto and truck traffic is diverted to rail, the diversion reduces the likelihood of crashes and the associated deaths, injuries, and property damage on the state's roadways. Generally, railroads experience a significant lower incident rate than highways. Sustainability. Shifting freight from truck to rail contributes not only to fuel cost savings, but also to environmental quality, since railroads on average are 4 times more fuel efficient than trucks. And last but not least, rail also contributes to the resiliency of the transportation system by providing a cost-effective option to shippers. Next slide. So what are the state rail plan goals? The key goal areas for the freight rail goals in the state rail plan came from the state freight plan, and for the passenger rail goals came from the multi-plan 2045 goals. And these include environmental stewardship, maintenance and preservation, awareness, education, and cooperative processes, accessibility and mobility, funding and finance, safety, and economic development. Next slide. So here we have the approach that we are following to develop the state rail plan. The plan development kicked off in mid-October of last year. Thus far, we've analyzed the current and future conditions of the rail system and the needs and opportunities, and we are now developing the list of proposed improvements and the investment program. Throughout the plan development, we've conducted stakeholder engagement through the Rail Advisory Council meetings and direct engagement with the railroads through a survey and requesting input on the rail projects via email. The draft plan will be submitted to MDOT in November of this year, and the goal is to have an FRA approved plan by the end of the year. Next slide. There are 2 long-distance intercity trains that are operated by Amtrak. The City of New Orleans, which travels between Chicago and New Orleans, and the service is of 2 daily trains, 1 in each direction. The Crescent, which also is 2 daily trains, 1 southbound and 1 northbound, between New York and New Orleans through Atlanta. And here on the map, you can see where the stops are along both services. In 2018, the Mississippi ridership on the City of New Orleans and Crescent were 72,000 and about 24,000 respectively. Recent trends in ridership show a steady decline for both services since peaking in 2010. We're talking about a 2.2% decline in ridership in the city of New Orleans since 2010, and about a 4.5% for the Crescent. A third Amtrak service also served Mississippi. Actually, if you can go back one slide. Yeah, thanks. To the passenger rail. A third Amtrak service also served Mississippi along the Gulf Coast, and this is it used to be called the Sunset Limited, and it traveled between Los Angeles, New Orleans, and Orlando, Florida. The service was suspended after Hurricane Katrina in 2005. The segment between New Orleans and Orlando was suspended. So while discussions continue to restore service between New Orleans and Florida, a near-term objective is the development of a multiple frequency corridor service between New Orleans and Mobile, Alabama. And actually, a few federal grants have been secured to commence the development of the corridor service along this segment. Next slide. So here we have the freight rail system. There's about 2,500 miles of rail that are operated by 5 Class 1 railroads. This include BNSF, Canadian National, CSX, Kansas City Southern, and Norfolk Southern. And there's 1 Class 2 railroad and 21 Class 3 railroads that are operating in the state. There's multiple port rail facilities. 11 ports have rail access, and this includes Gulfport and Pascagoula, along with multiple river ports. And then there are 3 truck rail facilities, which are listed here. One is an intermodal facility, one is a bulk transfer facility, and another one is an auto distribution facility. And then it's important to note that there are a lot of key intermodal terminals that serve Mississippi shippers that are located in the neighboring states, as well as ports. And here we have the rail flows between 2017 and on the left-hand side, and then the projections for 2045. In 2017, about 115 million tons of freight and about 2 million rail cars moved over Mississippi's rail system. About 80% of that was rail moving through the state. So this means that a lot of the freight rail lines in the state mainly serve to move freight to origins and destinations outside of the state, to major destinations like Memphis, Atlanta, Houston, Mobile, Birmingham, New Orleans. So key freight rail corridors in the state are through Class 1 rail corridors, as we can see in the maps, which have the thicker yellow lines. By 2045, Mississippi's freight rail system is projected to carry more than 160 million tons of freight and about 3.3 million cars, which is an increase of about 40% by tonnage and 60% by rail cars. The top commodity was chemical products, and this is projected to continue to be the top commodity in the future. Some of the rail corridors in the northern part of the state, like BNSF and Norfolk Southern, are projected to decline or have a flat growth in terms of the tonnage, and this is due to projected continued decline in coal traffic. Next slide. So this is a summary of the key needs and issues that were identified by the railroads in our outreach. So they're classified by state of good repair issues, which includes clearance restrictions, weight restrictions, bridges in need of rehab and repair, track maintenance and upgrades, as well as damage from flooding. It includes also system capacity issues, which are things like increasing line speed, improvement to yards to increase capacity, also increasing track and interchange capacity, new storage tracks and sidings, Reliability issues include rail line congestion, disruptions due to repairs on the lines or due to flooding. Safety concerns, especially at grade crossing that are in need of upgrades or grade separation needs. There's also issues with rail access, specifically for some of the ports in the state, as well as extending rail access to new shippers or industrial parks. And then the service expansion needs, which include things like reopening embargoed or abandoned rail lines, upgrading rail infrastructure for new shippers. So here we have the next steps in the plan. So what we're working right now is developing the proposed improvements and investments, or the projects, and then developing the investment program. We're also going to be conducting our next Rail Advisory Council meeting in November. And then the draft and final plan, which will be reviewed by the Rail Advisory Council as well as MDOT and approved by FRA. And with that, I'd like to open it up for questions.
Okay, so once again, if you do have a question and if you're on mute, do not forget to unmute yourself by simply hitting the microphone button until it turns green, or if you're on the phone, try *6. We also have our chat box, and then there's also emails up here for Josh Stubbs, the MDOT State Rail Plan Project Manager, as well as Lisa Destro that you can email directly with questions, should you not want to ask them this evening.
You can also use a chat box if you have any questions. All right. So next in the agenda, we have Taylor Marcantel, which is a senior planner with Neil Schaefer, and will provide an overview of the draft Metropolitan Transportation Plan. Taylor, we can't really hear you.
Sorry about that. All right, so tonight I'm going to be talking about the 2045 Metropolitan Transportation Plan, and this is just for the Jackson area. It should be about 15 minutes, so it should still get you out within an hour. All right, so tonight I'm going to quickly go over, what the MTP is, and then we're going to spend some time about the draft plan, the recommendations, and then offer a chance for a Q&A at the end. And if I say MTP, just know that that's short for Metropolitan Transportation Plan. I might go back and forth between the two. Like the statewide plan, this is also a federal requirement. All urban areas with 50,000 people or more have to develop an MTP. And with it being a federal requirement, there are some things that it has to do specifically. So it has to look 25 years in the future. That's why we're looking at 2045. It has to also be updated every 5 years. So we were here 5 years ago. We'll be here again in 5 years, updating this plan. It also looks at all modes of transportation. So it's not just roadways. It's also freight, bicyclists and pedestrians, transit. It's all modes. And then what's really important about this plan is it's fiscally constrained. So it looks at how much funding the region can realistically expect to be available, and then programs projects based on that amount of funding. And when we say the Jackson area, what we really mean is this metropolitan planning area. And if you see the screen, you can see this area in gold or yellow. That's really centered around the city of Jackson, but it includes all of the cities and towns around Jackson in that yellow area. So it covers most of Hinds County, Madison County, and Rankin County. And really what it does is it includes the area that's built up today and the area that'll be built up 20 years in the future. Now you might be asking, who approves the MTP? And the answer to that is the Metropolitan Planning Organization. In Jackson, that's staffed by the Central Mississippi Planning and Development District, CMPDD. But the MPO itself is really made up of these two committees. One is a technical committee that includes more of your planner and engineer types from all your local communities, as well as MDOT and the federal government. And they make recommendations to this Metropolitan Planning and Policy Committee, who ultimately would adopt this plan, and they're the ones who make the final decision for the MPO. The role of the MTP, in this slide, we just want to talk about, why does this really matter to you? This is a long-range transportation plan, but in order for a transportation project to receive federal funding, it has to be in this plan. So we're focused on the future, but we also are looking short-term too. After the MTP is developed, projects may then go into the shorter-term plan, which is the Transportation Improvement Program. And that really looks over the next 4 years and matches actual funding to these projects, and then they can move forward with design and implementation and construction if that's what type of project they are. As Sammy mentioned earlier, this has been almost a 2-year process now. For the MTP, this was a 5-stage process. We started with the visioning. We came out to the public and we worked with stakeholders early part of last year to really talk about priorities and goals and talk about people's ideas for transportation improvements. Then we did our technical analysis and the needs assessment. We looked at existing needs and future needs, and again, this was for all modes of transportation. Then we regrouped and said, hey, based on what we heard and what we found, what are the strategies and the projects that can really offer solutions? Oh, something happened. Okay, and then from there, we looked at what was financially feasible. Based on the amount of federal, state, and local funding, what can the Jackson area realistically expect to receive in funding? And then we prioritize projects, based on some factors I'll talk about later, and decided what made the cut to get included as a funded project versus an unfunded or visionary project. And where we are now, we're finalizing the plan, so we have the draft plan for review. We're asking for people to review it and give comments, and we'll make changes as needed. Now, for the reason you're here today, the draft plan. What we've done for the draft plan is we created a main report or an executive summary that's really graphically rich. It's short, something that's easy and painless for you to go through and read. So that's what's on the multi-plan webpage. It's also on CMPDD's webpage at www.cmpdd.org. And on that webpage with CMPDD, you can also find an interactive map that if you don't want to go through the PDF, you can go through it in a storybook format that'll walk you through it in the same way and offer you the ability to zoom in and zoom out and look at different areas. For those of you that are interested, we've also developed technical reports. This has been, almost a 2-year process, so there's been a lot of work that went into this main report. So you can go onto the CMPDD website to access these technical reports. And I'll just give you, in the next slides, a taste of what you can find in those if you do want to access them. But what we're really asking you to review would be this main report, and you can comment on that. Don't feel obligated to look at the technical reports, but they're there if you want them. And if you do have comments, we'll take them. All right, so the first technical report is about transportation modeling and forecasting. So in this, we're looking at really forecasting future development and the future transportation system to see how things might look different in the future. Will congestion change and where will it change? And then also the model gives us the ability to test projects to say, hey, I have a project from here to here. How much is this going to reduce delay either today or in 2045? So that's the first technical report. You can find all the information on that. The second is the existing conditions analysis. And for this one, we're looking at all modes and we're saying, what are the conditions on the ground today? And we tried to be as holistic and comprehensive as the data allows. So for roadways, we looked not just at congestion, we're looking at pavement condition, as you see on the map on the top here. We're looking at freight, we're looking at biking and walking and transit. That's the other map here is a demand map for public transit in the region. So if you want to see what things look like today, look at the existing conditions report. The third report is a scorecard, if you will, or a report card, and it's all about performance management. So this is a new requirement from the FAST Act. The MPO has to set regional targets, and it coordinates with MDOT for those. It has to set targets for certain measures. And this report summarizes the current performance and how that stacks up to the target, and then offers some strategies for, addressing any deficient areas. The needs assessment builds on the previous report. So it takes the results of the modeling, the existing conditions, and looking at future growth, and saying, hey, what are really the needs? And it does it again by mode. So if you want to see really the synthesis of those first three reports, as well as some of the public input, you can look at that needs assessment report. The plan development report is by far the biggest report, and it takes really everything that we've done and ties it all together. So it takes, it's where you might find, if you want to see what we heard from the public and from stakeholder in round one, you would find it in here. Plan development's also where we talk about the strategies, the goals and objectives, their environmental analysis, and where we start to talk about project prioritization, and then really get into the financial plan and picking the projects that make it into the draft plan. All right. This Tech Report 6 is one of the simpler ones for sure. It's a checklist. So this is a federal requirement, and there are many requirements. So this document just goes through each requirement and documents, how the MTP addressed it and where you can find that. The congestion management report, or congestion management process report, this is more of a deep dive specifically into congestion. So if that's what you're interested in, you can find a lot of detail here that looks at congestion at probably more angles than you've thought of before. All right, so now I'll talk about the recommendations. The draft plan really has two sets of recommendations for each mode. So it has the fiscally constrained plan, which is what we can actually do with the limited amount of funding that we have, and then the visionary plan, which is other things that we would like to do if funding is to become available. And the plan recommendations are organized around these 8 strategies. And these are the strategies that are going to help the region achieve its transportation goals. So I'm going to talk about these in 3 different groups. First group is centered around roadways, and it includes these first 4 strategies. So first strategy for roadways is responsibly improving the roadway system. That means focusing on projects that are cost efficient. That might mean more intersection projects than widening projects. And then also looking at the other strategy, the second strategy for roadways would be looking at redesigning key corridors and intersections. Not every corridor needs to be widened or to be extended, there are things you can do to improve the safety and the operations on corridors just by tweaking what's there with some design improvements. The other two strategies really address freight, so prioritizing roadway projects that will also improve freight conditions, and then the last one is prioritizing maintenance. So projects that will, address existing maintenance and improve maintenance in the future. So for the roadway project types, if you look in the draft plan, you'll see tables, and they're broken down into capacity projects for roadways and non-capacity projects. Capacity projects, as the name implies, are those that really focus on adding capacity to a roadway. Those are your new roads, your roadway widenings, or adding turn lanes for a long stretch of the road. Your non-capacity projects would essentially be everything else. That's where you'll see your bridge and your pavement maintenance. You'll see safety projects, and then really specific intersection or interchange improvements for operational improvements. And when we were developing this MTP, we had a lot of projects to look at. So we had to prioritize these projects, and what you see on the screen is how we did that. We gave each project a score based on these different factors. The highest weight is related to congestion. You would look at this congestion reduction, which is 14%, and then the benefit cost ratio, which is 18%. And those two things are both related to congestion. And so that accounts for, almost a third of the project score. The other things are related to safety, bicycle and pedestrian benefits, freight benefits, and then, if a project supports existing plans, gets points for that. If it protects the environment or just minimizes, doesn't have a high potential for impacts to either the natural environment, things like wetlands, or to the human environment, to our low-income communities, then the less impact, the better the score. So that was roadways. For bicycle and pedestrian and transit, we usually kind of look at these all together. So the first strategy for these is to rapidly expand the biking and walking infrastructure in the region. There's demand in the region that's not being met, so this needs to be something that's a priority. And then for transit, it's almost the same story. There's a lot of demand for transit in the region, so we're talking about improving and expanding public transit. Just to focus on bicycle and pedestrian for a second, the strategy for bicycle and pedestrian in the region really falls into three different buckets. So the first one is the existing projects that we already know are funded or are committed. And those are the standalone bicycle or pedestrian projects. If you're familiar with the lingo, those might be transportation alternatives projects or some other locally funded projects. Then the second bucket would be projects that are incidental to roadway projects. So when you're widening a road or you're creating a new road, talking about adding sidewalk or bicycle facilities with that roadway project. And then the last part are the most expansive recommendations are focused around these high priority bicycle and pedestrian corridors. So these are corridors where the need is the greatest and where the region's trying to build a network of bicycle and pedestrian facilities. These are not actually projects, but these are the corridors that the MPO is encouraging local communities to develop bicycle and pedestrian projects to improve those corridors. And then for transit, the MTP does assume that, at a minimum, the existing transit service is going to continue. So that means the City of Jackson's bus service, JTran, is going to continue to operate more or less at the same level in the future. And the same for the rural transit systems that operate in Hinds, Madison, and Rankin counties. But the plan also has a vision element to it too, for transit. So it identifies corridors in the region that, you know, can support things like bus rapid transit, express bus, or if they don't have it now, just normal local bus service. And those are things that, as you know, if funding becomes available, the MPO will work to advance those. And the last group of strategies I want to talk about tonight are safety and technology. So this first one is about safety, and it's talking about establishing a safety management system. And really what that's about is just creating a data-driven process for looking at the safety needs in a region. So for the MPO, that means coordinating with MDOT, get good crash data and other data to be able to determine what are really the problem types, what are the safety issues, and where are they in the region, and then brainstorming ideas on how to improve those. We've already done a lot of that with the MTP, but this is something that the MPO is going to continue in the future. And then the last piece on technology, there's been a lot of advances in connected and autonomous vehicles over the past 5 years, for sure. But they're still, in their infancy, or at least into being a toddler. There's still much to be determined about those. So for the MTP, we're saying the MPO should continue to monitor those emerging technology options, including things like connected and autonomous vehicles. And that will wrap it up for the MTP. If you do want more information, you can go to the MPO's website at cmpdd.org, or you can contact Leslie Callender at CMPDD. And her email is on here. It's lcallender at cmpdd.org. So LCALLENDER at cmpdd.org. You can also just call CMPDD at 601-981-1511. 601-981-1511. And with that, we can go into questions and answers. And I'll turn it back over now to Paula.
Okay, and I think if there are not any questions, then Sammy is going to close us out.
So I do want to take this time to thank you for your attention and your attendance. Just a reminder about our comment period. CMPDD is September 19th through November the 2nd. The statewide plan is October the 16th through November the 30th. One thing that I do want to accomplish before we leave here, we've been talking about wanting your input. So I'm going to ask Paula if she would to let me present. And I want to walk you through the website just to give you an idea of how you can review the plans and how you can comment. So you should be seeing our website, and it is mstransportationplan2045.com. There's some good information there on the front page. And there's a lot of different avenues to get to our plans, but the best way is to do this is to go to the top, and you'll see a link called Plans. And once you click on that, you can scroll down, and it'll have each plan for the MPO areas as well as the statewide plan listed toward the bottom of the page. So if you had an interest in reviewing the Jackson area Metropolitan Transportation Plan, all you got to do is click View Plan, and it'll bring it up, and you can view it. And it's the same for all the others. If you want to make a comment on, for instance, the Jackson area plan, click Comment. One thing that you need to do when you look at this section here is make sure to select your region. There's 4 regions. In this instance, you'd want Jackson Metropolitan Plan. You can put your name, your email, put your comments, hit send, and it's done. It's going to reach someone at CMPDD, and it will also reach Donna Lum, who is our moderator, and it will also be copied to MDOT as well. If for some reason you don't want to do it electronically, you can download a form, and this is what the form would look like. And so all you have to do is take this, print it out, and just fill in the information, and you can mail it to CMPDD at the address listed within that comment form. So I think it's pretty straightforward. That there's other good information in there, such as the comment periods. On the first page, you can see when the public meetings will take place. You can go to the public meeting page if you have any interest in attending any of the other meetings. But one thing that I didn't want to do, I didn't want to leave you asking for input and you all not know how to provide that input. So go to the web page. Of course, if you don't have internet or can't make it to the web page or for whatever reason, of course, you can give Leslie Callender a call at 601-981-1511, or you can give me a call at 601-249-5282, and we'll help you out as much as we can. So I guess my last question is, do we have any outstanding questions that we need to answer from the chat box? And do we have any questions from those that just called in? If you want to ask a question, you would do that by unmuting by dialing *6.
Sammy, this is Paula. There are no outstanding questions in the chat box.
Okay. All right. Well, I just want to thank you all again for attending. I know everybody's got busy schedules, and I know that you got things that you want to do tonight. So at this point, this concludes our meeting. Thank you.